We're going to demonstrate how to convert data for a borrowing base certificate. And usually what we do is we put an AP summary in the actual file for the borrowing base certificate for analysis purposes. And the information that we put in is the vendor number, the vendor name, and then the appropriate aging for each vendor for that time period. So a lot of times when we export that information out of some accounting program, it usually comes out in a report format that is not easily converted to this table format. So right now I'm going to show you an example of data that has come out of a report, an accounts payable report that went out to a PDF file and is, as you can see, is in a very unorganized format here, at least for converting it over to a table. What I'd like to do is show you how we convert this data. There are many ways to do this, but we find this way to be probably one of the easiest ways to do it. So let me highlight first the data that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the vendor number, I'm interested in the vendor name, and I am interested in the aged totals, which are the total amount due, current, 30, 60, 90, so forth. As you can see, these two sets of data do not line up, and there is a lot of extra data within this. So I'm going to go through first and remove some of the data that's not needed, and rearrange the data, and this is basically how we go through it. So I'll leave that record highlighted, and the first thing I want to do is use autofilter to delete the unnecessary data. So I want to highlight the whole range, and I am going to go to data and turn on autofilter. Now my selection for filters are at the top here, and I'll highlight this in a gray color so we know exactly where the line is. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to remove the data, or filter the data that I want to keep. So I will remove all age totals, and I'll pick something unique here. The vendor ID contains the line that has the vendor name, so what I'll do is I'll unselect the vendor ID. Now that leaves me a bunch of data that is both blank lines, page totals, which I really don't need. So I'm going to highlight these lines, and I am going to delete them. Right click and delete the rows. Now I also notice I'll take the filters off, and you can see I have my data selected, and the column H actually has nothing in it. So what I'm going to do is I want to delete this column because it's just not necessary. Now these last columns here, I will make all the same size to make it easier to view this, and I'll select the number format. Now if I select the vendor ID, I'm going to clear the contents of a lot of data that I just really don't need. So these are all my vendor names. I want to keep those, but all this other information I'm just going to highlight and press delete and clear the contents. I noticed that some of my vendor names did not come over the way I wanted to. Now there's two ways to do this. We can do this with a formula, but there's only a few of them here. So all I'm going to do is highlight the name and hit Control X, and then move it over and press enter. And by doing so, I can move these few items over. If I want to move them over and there are many items, then I would likely use a formula and paste as values, and we'll see that how that's used as we look at some of the moving this data around. And I'll move the last one. So now my data is really kind of uniform here, and I'll look at all my data, and I can see now that I have my vendor number, vendor name, and then right below it I have my age totals. So I would like that all to be on the age total line, but so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to insert a column just to have more room to work with. And on the age total line, I want to use a formula. I want to press the equal sign and click on the vendor number. And for the vendor name, normally what I would do is I would press equals and I would click on the vendor name. But the problem with this is this particular program put the word name and a colon after it, so I really don't want all that. I really just want the vendor name. I don't want the title, that name title before it. So I'm going to use a formula here, and basically what I'm going to do is I am going to use a mid command, which is a text command, and it asks me to highlight the text that I want to look at, and the cell E13 contains that text. The starting number, since I have about 6 characters there, I'll start on that I don't want, which is the name colon. I'll put a comma, start with the 7th character, and the number of characters I just want to go to the end, so I'll say 500 just to exceed whatever my expectations are on that line. Now here I have the vendor number and it's there, but one other thing is it actually has a space before it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the trim command, and that will take out all unnecessary spaces, so I'll have a nice clean name. Now if I click on age totals, because that is the line that I've completed, and now that I have a formula here, I can copy this formula all the way down, and it now has put in my vendor number and my vendor name. Now if I return to my full data, I can highlight the whole section that I just put the formulas in. I can, let's do that again. I'll highlight the whole area. I'll press Control C, and then I will paste as values. That will convert the formulas to data. Now my vendor number and vendor name are on the same line with my age totals. So now I can remove my age total lines, and these are the lines that I don't need anymore. So now I can highlight these, and I can delete the lines. And when I return to my original data, by turning the filters off, now everything is in a format that I can use with my grand totals here at the bottom. Now all I need to do, even though the columns don't line up, the first 2 do, so I can highlight this and go over to my AP file and paste as values. And my numbers begin over here, so I'll return to my raw data, and I will highlight the aging columns, and I will return to my aging table, and I will paste as values. Now the interesting thing here is I have extra lines in here, and I actually have the totals mathematically computed through the sum command. Now I've got 294,000, which is a calculation which coincides with the raw data of 294,000. So now I know I've captured all the data and it's been captured correctly. That will allow me to complete my borrowing base at that point.